And people look around them and they say, who cares about me? Who's worried about me or my parents or my kids? And when that happens, that kind of political alienation happens, people can become prone to conspiracy theories and all kinds of big lies and everything else. And here is the simple truth, not complicated, that right now, in this year, 2021, we face more crises than this country has faced, certainly since the Great Depression and maybe going back to the Civil War, when the very existence of this country was at stake. As we speak right now, whether it's in your state of Georgia or my state of Vermont, and all over this country, there are tens of millions of working families who have lost their jobs, lost their incomes, and they are worried tonight as to how they're going to be able to feed their families. They're worried about the back rent that they owe. We have a moratorium on evictions, but that moratorium someday is going to end. And people are saying, how am I going to pay thousands of dollars in back rent? I'm going to be evicted. I'm going to be out on the street. And people in the midst of this terrible, terrible pandemic, where we have lost over 400,000 lives, well over 400,000 lives. There are over 90 million people who are uninsured or underinsured and are having difficulty affording going to the doctor. And on it goes. Kids, I have 7 grandchildren. Kids all over this country have had their education disrupted. As a result of the pandemic, people have become isolated from their friends and their families. Mental illness is soaring. Increased numbers of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. This country faces just terrible, terrible problems. I think we can agree that the year 2020 was the worst year in so many ways in our lifetimes, modern history of this country. And now, right now, it is absolutely imperative that the Congress of the United States understand that reality and keeps faith with the American people. And one of the reasons, by the way, and I say this to the presiding officer today, who is from Georgia, recently won his election, it is doubly important that we keep faith with the American people because promises were made in that election in Georgia, which was not just a Senate race, it was more of a national race. President Biden was involved. Majority Leader Schumer was involved. I was involved. Other leading Democrats were involved. And we said to the people of Georgia, and we said to the people of America, if we gain the majority, we are going to significantly improve lives for working people all over this country. And those are promises made that must be kept. So I want to just spend a few moments to talk about what is in this bill. You know, we throw out numbers, 1.9 trillion. Who knows what 1.9 trillion is? It's such an unfathomable number. It's such a huge number. What does it mean? Who knows? Who understands that? But I want you to understand what is in this bill. For a start, what I believe, and I know you believe, Mr. President, is that when people are hurting, when they owe back rent, when they can't afford to feed their kids, when they can't afford to go to the doctor, that we need to get cash into the pockets of those people as soon as we possibly can. And I was one of the people here a month ago, a whole lot of people talking about it. I said, we need direct payments. We need to get cash into the hands of people. And I fought very hard. We ended up with just $600 in the last bill. Wasn't enough. It's a start, not enough. But we said our goal was $2,000. And in this bill, there will be an additional $1,400 for every working class man, woman, and child. So if you are an individual, single person, making $75,000 or less, when we pass this legislation, you're going to get a check for $1,400. If you are a couple earning less than $150,000, and let's just say you have 2 kids, each person in the family, the husband, the wife, and the 2 kids, are going to get $1,400 a piece. That's $5,600. And let me tell you something, for a struggling working class family, that $5,600 is going to mean an enormous amount. Allow people to pay the rent, allow people to pay off their debts, allow people to go to the doctor. So that's what this legislation is about. We made a promise. Some of us made that promise, I did, that we would make sure that working class families, each individual gets $2,000, and we're going to keep that promise. $600 then, $1,400 now. As a result of this pandemic, we have seen a horrific increase in unemployment. Unemployment is soaring all over this country. Millions of workers have lost their jobs. They got no income coming in. The extended unemployment benefits that were previously passed are going to expire in mid-March. What this legislation does, very importantly, if you're unemployed right now and you're worried that you're going to lose your unemployment, when we pass this legislation, your unemployment is going to be extended through the end of September, and on top of the normal unemployment benefits you get from your state, and they vary state to state, you're going to get an additional $400 a week. We will not turn our backs on the millions of unemployed workers in this country. Included in the legislation that we are fighting for is the need to raise the minimum wage in this country from the starvation wage that currently exists of $7.25 an hour to a living wage of $15 an hour. Now, we understand that restaurants and small businesses are hurting, and in this legislation there will be a significant amount of money to make sure that small businesses will be able to afford that wage increase. But, you know, when we talk about the economy, the media very often focuses on the stock market. That's important. We can focus on unemployment, terribly important. But what we don't focus on enough is that half of our workers in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. They got nothing in the bank, and they have to live off the paycheck they make. And if they have an automobile problem, car breaks down, somebody in the family gets sick, they're in deep financial trouble. And it seems to me that in the richest country in the history of the world, it is not too much to demand that if you work 40 hours a week, don't live in poverty. $15 an hour is not going to make anybody rich. But I have seen workers and talked to workers all over this country trying to raise their kids on $10, $12 an hour, and you can't do it. So $15 an hour is an important start in making sure that all working people in this country can live with dignity. Mr. President, this legislation will expand the child tax credit from $2,000 to $3,000 and to $3,600 for families with kids under the age of 6. Now, what is not talked about very much in America, not by politicians, not by the media, is the fact that we have one of the highest rates of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. And that is a terrible, terrible thing. You know, politicians give speeches, the future of this country is without children, and so forth and so on. They got millions of kids living in poverty. Millions of families can't afford to send their kids to decent quality child care. So expanding the child tax credit will go a very long way to reduce child poverty in America, and that is something that we must do. Mr. President, it is no great secret that as a result of the pandemic, our revenue coming in to state and local governments are in significant decline. And the result of that is that in the last year, well over 1 million state and local employees have been laid off. And we're talking about teachers, we're talking about firemen, we're talking about police officers, and other municipal and state employees. And when you have those layoffs, not only is that a crisis unto itself for those workers, it means that state and local government cannot provide the services that are needed to be provided in the midst of this terrible crisis. So this legislation would provide $350 billion to to state and local governments, many of whom are facing bankruptcy. Now, obviously, the crisis that we're facing today is not only an economic crisis, it is clearly a health crisis. And the good news is that in a relatively short period of time, at least 2 manufacturers in this country, and more, I think, are coming on board, have introduced and created vaccines, which are now being distributed. That is the good news. The bad news is that we need to significantly increase the production of those vaccines. We don't have enough. And even more importantly, we have to do a heck of a lot better job in distributing those vaccines and getting those vaccines into the arms of people. And this legislation will provide billions and billions of dollars to do just that. At a time when we are looking at the highest level of hunger in this country in decades, many billions of dollars are going to go to making sure that our children and our families do not go hungry. Clearly, one of the major crises facing this country is that schools in every state are either not open or they're open in irregular hours. Kids are trying to get an education online. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But our goal is to make sure that we can reopen schools and expand after-school and child care programs for working families and do it in a way that is safe. We want parents to feel good and know that the facilities they're sending their children to are safe. And we got a whole lot of money in this bill to do just that. In this bill, in order to protect workers, there is a sizable sum of money to prevent the pensions of millions of workers and retirees from being slashed by 30, 40, or even 65%. A number of years ago, in the middle of the night, some big omnibus bill language was put in that would destroy the promises made to millions of workers in terms of the pensions that they were guaranteed. And we rectify that in this bill. Right now, in America, as I mentioned earlier, some 90 million of our people are either uninsured or underinsured, which speaks to the need, in my view, to major health care reform. And my own view is that we need to move toward a Medicare for all single-payer program so that we're not spending twice as much per capita on health care as any other country on earth, despite so many people being uninsured or underinsured. Well, Medicare for all is not in this bill, but what is in this bill is a significant amount of money to expand health care, and we're still looking at the best ways to do that. One of the ways will probably be expanding Medicaid and also investing significantly in community health centers and the National Health Service Corps. We have a crisis in terms of the number of doctors and nurses that we need, and the National Health Service Corps is a program which will forgive debt for doctors and nurses if they practice in underserved areas. So, Mr. President, I know sometimes we get consumed by numbers. It's going to be 2.1 trillion, 1.9 trillion, 1.7 trillion. That is not the issue. The issue is whether we are prepared to address the crises facing the American people. Will this bill solve all of the problems that we face? No, it will not. Will it go a long way to addressing many of the crises and easing the anxiety that so many working families have? Yes, it will. But this should not be the end of the process. As soon as we pass this, we're going to come back with another major piece of legislation, and that deals with some of the long-term structural problems our country faces in terms of a crumbling infrastructure, in terms of the need to deal with the existential threat of climate change. We need to create millions of good-paying jobs, and that is something that this Congress has got to address. Too many of our people are unemployed. Too many of our people are underemployed, and that we will be dealing with in the next COVID reconciliation bill. Now, there has been some discussion here. The media seems fixated on the issue of partisanship. Oh, my God, we're being so partisan here. So let me remind everybody is that under the Trump administration, massive tax breaks were passed that went to the top 1% and large corporations. 83% of the benefits in the Trump tax plan went to the 1% and large corporations. And you know how bipartisan that bill was, passed in reconciliation? There was not one Democrat that voted for that bill. It was voted just with Republican votes. And then outrageously, as part of reconciliation, Republicans came forward and they say, hey, we think it's a brilliant idea to repeal the Affordable Care Act and throw up to 32 million people off the health care that they have. I mean, I don't know what people are thinking about when they propose to throw tens of millions of people off the health care they have, but that was their idea, to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And by one vote, the late John McCain, that did not happen. But not one Democrat voted for that bill. My point is that it's one thing for my Republican friends here to be talking about the need for bipartisanship, which all of us support. But the reality is they used exactly the same process to pass, or at least try to pass, major pieces of legislation. So, Mr. President, all that I want to say is that we are living in an unprecedented moment in American history. And again, it is quite likely that this Congress today, President Biden, are facing more serious crises than any president, certainly since FDR, maybe going back to Abraham Lincoln, have faced. We got a health care crisis, we got a pandemic, we got an economic meltdown, we got an education crisis, we got an infrastructure crisis, we got a criminal justice crisis, we got an immigration crisis, you name it, we got it. And either we are going to have the courage to address those problems or we're not. And I think now is the time to do it. So we certainly look forward to support from our Republican colleagues. But what is most important is that at a time of massive pain and anxiety, this Congress acts boldly on behalf of working families. For too long, we have seen the Congress give tax breaks to billionaires. We have seen lobbyists work to get hundreds of billions of dollars in corporate welfare for people who don't need it. We have seen a tax system in which major corporations like Amazon, maybe the most profitable corporation in America, one of the most profitable corporations, owned by the wealthiest guy in America, pays zero in federal taxes. And right now, the very rich have an effective tax rate which is lower than working families. So I know it may sound like a radical idea, but the time is now for the United States Congress to begin to represent the vast majority of the people, the working class of this country, the middle class of this country, lower-income people who are struggling. Let us work together. Let us crush this terrible pandemic. Let's get our kids back to school. Let's reopen our economy. And let us create a government that works for all of us and not just the very few. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.